Greetings all, Ferrariman 601 here, and welcome for the first time to War on the Sea. Yes, the same developers who have created what has become one of my favorite games, Cold Waters, despite I'm playing it in a heavily modded specification, comes to us War on the Sea, which is a naval combat game very similar to Cold Waters, but this one is centered on the World War II era and the immediate post-war era. It is a naval combat game that includes surface ships, quite obviously, as well as submarines and aircraft. So we've got ourselves quite a bit of variety, I think, at least potentially, with this game. And what I have here today is USS Massachusetts, which is BB-59. It is a South Dakota-class battleship built in the interwar period for the United States. You may see some features of it that look rather similar to the Iowa class, with which we are far more familiar, and that's because the South Dakota class was the one that immediately preceded the Iowa class, and you can see many design elements that eventually made their way on the Iowas were trialed here on the South Dakota class. So, yeah, a lot of stuff very similar between the South Dakotas and the Iowas. Gross tonnage, though, the South Dakotas were built at about 35,000 tons, whereas the Iowas were built at about 45,000 tons. You will see a beam to us at about, I don't know, what is that? Maybe 500-600 yards is an Essex-class aircraft carrier. That is USS Intrepid, and we are forming our own little battle group here. Both of these ships actually still exist. You can go visit Massachusetts or Intrepid if you happen to be in the Northeast. Massachusetts is currently at Fall River, Massachusetts. She is moored as a museum ship there since 1964, I believe. And USS Intrepid, the aircraft carrier, with some slight modifications. She does have an angled flight deck now, but beyond that, Intrepid is still afloat, and she is a museum permanently moored at New York City on the west side of Manhattan. Been there a couple of times. She's a cool ship. I've never been to Massachusetts, but I'd like to visit Massachusetts. The battleship, anyway. I have actually been to the state of Massachusetts, but I have not visited Battleship Cove, where Massachusetts and a couple other ships are now moored for the public benefit. However, this is really my first foray into this game, and because I am not 100% sure as to how things work in here, because the control scheme is a bit different from Cold Waters, I'm just going to see what we can do in terms of navigation, maneuvering, and perhaps we're going to be engaging some mock targets here. The idea of having a friendly ship so close is I don't want to hit him, because that would be bad. And the idea of using a ship that is not an Iowa, even though the Iowas are in this game, is just for a little bit of variety. This bit of control here, you can see that we have a whole bunch of controls for maneuvering and navigation, as well as for some large-scale weapon systems. So we've got our primary and secondary batteries. So here on the South Dakota class, we have a 1645 battery, so 45 caliber 16-inch main guns. Effectively identical to what was on the Iowas, although the Iowas had a 50 caliber main gun, but they could fire the same ammunition and all that kind of stuff. The secondary guns are identical to the Iowas. They are the 538s, 38 caliber 5-inch gun. And then, of course, we have a whole suite of anti-aircraft defense in the form of 20 and 40 millimeter rapid-fire guns, plus whatever small arms that the crew had on board, if things really went pear-shaped. But we have got controls here for the way that we can navigate the entire group. So if I put in some speed here, so let's just make flank power here at 28 knots for the South Dakota. You can see that we come aboard with some speed on the shafts. You can see the propulsion layout here on the South Dakota is very similar to the Iowas, twin rudders and 4 screws. And you can see that we're putting up a little bit of a rooster tail. You can see at the same time Intrepid is also putting up a rooster tail. So I am controlling both ships right now. If I want to turn my ship to the right, let's do hard over, and I'll show you the rudders deflecting here. Hard over, full right rudder. There we go, the rudders are deflecting. And the ship starts to turn. You will see that Intrepid should start to turn as well. And she is. Her heeled over to port because she's in a hard right turn. Swing back to the left to stabilize at 200 degrees, and you see Intrepid also rolls over back to center. Interesting. I can also change my rudder angle with the A and D keys, which is what we've done there. Engine commands are R and E, so I can change that in 1 knot increments. So I can control the entire formation here. I can also tell Intrepid, in this case, how do we want to control this. So we go line abreast at 500 yards or 1,000 yards. She'll eventually maneuver into that position. Tell her to column right in this case, I suppose, in relation to myself. So we'll run basically side by side. Damage control. This is where I think this game is going to be really cool, because this is the schematic of the major compartment spaces on my ship here. And a South Dakota class battleship, similarly to the North Carolinas and Iowas, they are compartmentalized to the nth degree. Every space on every deck is a watertight compartment for the most part. So obviously we're seeing a greatly simplified view, because there were probably 1,000, 1,100 compartments on a ship like this. If the Iowas have 1,600 and the South Dakotas are just basically shorter Iowas, yeah, they have a lot of compartments as well. So this is greatly simplified, but we have things such as our propulsion systems, rudders, magazines for our main and secondary battery guns, and we have engineering spaces. So we have boiler rooms and we have engine rooms. So all of these things are modeled here. The Iowas have 8 engine rooms, as it were. They've got 4 fire rooms where it's just boilers, and then they have 4 engine rooms where it's just turbine engines and electrical power plants. The South Dakotas were a little different in that. They had their fire and engine rooms combined, but at the same time, basically the same engineering layout. Very similar propulsion as well. They use the same type of boiler and a similar type of turbine. But beyond that, if we were to get into an engagement and we would see flooding, we would be able to address that with assigning damage control parties to given areas. Like I can click one of these wrenches and then send them into an engineering space or into a magazine, and they would start making repairs if they were necessary. Similarly, I could also counter flood. If I had flooding, let's say here on the port side, I could counter flood the complementary compartments on the starboard side to try and maintain an even keel. So that's cool. On the main deck here, where we've got our aircraft, our main and secondary batteries, and our funnel. Funnel very important, obviously, for exhausting all of the combustion byproducts for the steam plant, as well as for ventilating a great portion of the ship. Another distinguishing feature of the South Dakota relative to the North Carolinas or the Iowas is that the South Dakotas just have a single funnel, so all of the exhaust from all those boilers and auxiliary diesel and things like that just trunked up through the center of the ship and out basically the aft superstructure, which is interesting, and it's an interesting look. Because otherwise, these ships are very visually similar to the Iowas, particularly the early versions of the Iowas, the Iowa and New Jersey in their initial spec. So that's cool. On the main deck as well, I could send damage control to the main batteries, to the secondary batteries, to our fire control directors, which are interesting, as well as obviously the funnel and the navigation bridge. Armored conning tower on the South Dakotas. I believe the armor thickness was a little bit less than the 17.3 inches that you got on the Iowas, but still very formidable, still armored against a 16-inch shell in theory. Next screen, it looks like we have got our main battery controls. So these are our 3 main turrets, as well as our fire control directors, the main and alternate directors. On top of the superstructure, you will see that we have got this Y-shaped appendage with a little bit of a radar mast on top. That is the primary main battery fire control director. That is an optical device And in these days, it was already being supplemented by radar. But that is an optical scope that is physically going to swivel in any direction we need so that we can lock onto a target. And then via the vector that this thing is now generating, via its own orientation, we can pipe that down to main battery plot, which is an area deep within the ship, buried in the armored citadel, where we have got electromechanical computers that are going to take variables from the main and secondary directors. The secondary director is back here. It looks very similar to how it does on the Iowas even now. But it's going to take the orientation of those directors. It's going to take the zoom and deflection and all sorts of things that the operators inside those directors are dialing in. And then it's going to feed them into our electromechanical computer. That computer is also being fed with information about our ship itself. What is our speed? What is our heading? We have a gyro compass on board, which is going to give us our heading, but it's also going to give us our latitudinal and longitudinal orientation in the water. You can see that we don't have flat calm seas today, which means that our ship is pitching and rolling a bit. Those variables as well are being fed into the fire control computer, because if you're trying to do long-range artillery, you really want a stable platform, and as you can see how we just took a little bit of a dive into that wave, we don't exactly have a stable platform. So this computer, without any transistors, without any microprocessors, is able to make these calculations in real time, and it's able to do range keeping with a target. So it's going to give you very precise information about where you need to be aiming your guns. That works for the main battery, which is the 16-inch battery, as well as the secondary battery, which is the 5-inch guns. The 5-inch guns, they are hybrids. They could run anti-ship, anti-land, and anti-air if you need them to do that. So large variety of ammunition for the secondary battery, which is really cool. Here is the control for the secondary battery. We just have port and starboard batteries. They are also, as you can see, running off of the main and alternate fire control directors. If, for example, I go here to our minimap into target mode and I select Intrepid, watch our batteries, not the batteries necessarily, but watch the fire control directors. Top of the superstructure on the foremast, as well as in the lower section of the aft superstructure. Just look. They start to pivot, just as they normally would in reality. So they have now pivoted, and they are facing the overall direction of Intrepid. So we are now plotting a target solution via our fire control computer and main battery plot for Intrepid. And that data would now be fed to the main and secondary batteries, which is really cool. If I go back to main battery control, I can load them with Star Shell. I hope that means Star Shell, because I don't want to be shooting at Intrepid. There we go. Telling them to hold fire, but I am now pivoting the main battery guns toward Intrepid with that fire control solution. So there they are. So we're loaded with Star Shell, so if these were to fire, they probably wouldn't do much, if any, damage to Intrepid, but now you can see that we plotted a fire control solution at 99%. We have our main battery turrets that are pivoted over to look at Intrepid. Our secondary battery also now pivoting over. So I have now positioned the ship for a main battery and secondary battery broadside for Intrepid via the fire control solution that we have plotted. I can stop those directors now from plotting a solution, and you'll see that they are now starting to pivot back toward their neutral positions. I can tell the secondary battery to ceasefire, and that will go back to its stowed position. The main battery will also ceasefire and go back to its stowed position. So that's really cool. I'm also able to switch over to control of Intrepid. And here she is. Intrepid is able to go a little bit faster than Massachusetts, so we're holding at 28 knots, as it were. See, if we go underwater, you can see Intrepid's propulsion arrangement. Quite similar to Massachusetts, all things considered. Here on Intrepid, we have got a similar damage control breakout in terms of compartments, engineering spaces, fire rooms with engine rooms, as well as shaft alleys and rudders. Magazine spaces as well. Obviously no huge main guns on a ship like this, but we do have the secondary guns. Fire control directors, similar to what we have there on Massachusetts. I can go into target mode here. Select Massachusetts, and then our battery directors will start to pivot over toward Massachusetts, and then we can, for example, once we're starting to plot a solution, we could do something similar with these really anti-aircraft guns, but yeah, they do have some ability there for anti-surface targets. I can tell my, in this case, main battery guns to train over toward Massachusetts, and we're doing the same thing. I can tell them to ceasefire, and they will go back to their stowed position. We can now stop tracking Massachusetts. Okay, so you can see there what the gun directors are doing, and then of course all the other controls are going to be very similar. I can, of course, also tell Intrepid to increase or decrease speed. She's in formation with Massachusetts, and Massachusetts, of course, is the formation leader here, so I can tell both ships to stop or to continue at their current speed, and they, of course, will oblige. I tell my ships to stop, then you'll see the props will come to a stop. And there you go. So if we want to do any sort of gunnery here, steer course a bit. And we can do some manual targeting as well. We'll stop at about 240 in terms of where we want to be. Okay. So we will go to main battery here, and we can manually start to target a beam to port. So we can do that, and now the main battery is going to open up with a high capacity salvo to port. So there you go. And they will continue to fire until I tell them to stop, so we've just done that, and they'll go back to their stored position. And I saw some splashes out there. That would show where our shells have landed. Similarly, I can do this here with our port side secondary battery. I can tell them to fire in that direction as well. And you can see because these 5-inch guns can reload a whole lot faster than the 16s, we can fire several rounds per minute. And you can actually see the shells in flight, which is really cool. So you can see where our shot is blowing up. That's Star Shell, I believe. Yes, it is, so you can see that we're illuminating the area. Tell that into Ceasefire, and then they'll go back into their stowed positions. Main batteries. Can do the same thing once again here. Going to be landing real close, so we should be able to see the splashes. You can even see those shells going. Let's look for splashes. Not seeing splashes yet. Yeah, flight time is pretty long on these things, I am aware, but I'm not seeing where they're coming down. Did not see those shells leave. Yeah. Yeah, it's not going to be particularly possible to watch that. But you can absolutely see the theory here. I do appreciate the effects, though. You see the shockwave, and I believe you see some crenulation of the sea surface from the shockwave, which is very realistic when guns like this would be fired. Yep. That's cool. That is really cool stuff. I do appreciate that. All right, Ceasefire, main battery. Okay, so we can do some gunnery, we can do maneuvering, we can do navigation, we can do target spotting. So that's cool stuff. In terms of Intrepid, we go back and play as Intrepid. Can we break formation? Yes. We can break formation with Massachusetts, which means that I can now start to navigate independently of Massachusetts. I don't seem to have any access to my air wing, which is interesting. Let's see if I do hard over to port. turn independently with Massachusetts. Let's see. She heals over real quick, I'll tell you that much. You'd be noticing that. Back to Massachusetts for a moment. We are not steering course at all. Back to Intrepid. So yeah, we can control an entire formation, or we can then take control of the ship independently, because now we are starting to run into what would be a collision course if we were going to be silly. So that's cool. If I go back to Massachusetts and I just stop engines, or actually throw them into full reverse at this point. Little just for a little insurance, but I think we're okay in terms of the collision. Yeah, we're fine. Okay, so we can break formation, we can tell them to form up, we can do all sorts of things. Just plotting a fire control solution there again on Intrepid. You'll see the director's slew as Intrepid's location changes with respect to our own. So we can control whole formations of ships either as one entity or individually. So if we want Intrepid now to rejoin formation, we tell them to form up. No other units selected to form up. How do we do this? Select mode, Intrepid, form up. Column right. Line abreast. So we go back to Intrepid, and now in formation with Massachusetts. So Intrepid is now going to be slowing down, as you can see. Tell them to follow. We're not going to follow Intrepid. Break. Right. So now if we fire up our power plant, Intrepid fires up her power plant, continues to maneuver hard over. We are now maneuvering independently as well to get into position. So it looks like we will be able to reform any sort of formation that we need somewhat autonomously. So I'm just not going to touch anything and see what happens. So at the moment we are going in a bit of a circle. Intrepid is still hard over to starboard. Interesting. What happens if I stop engines? What does Intrepid do? Intrepid also stops engines. Interesting. Bring power back in. Intrepid. Yep, also bringing power back in. I can see the rooster tail. Interesting. Very, very interesting. Meanwhile, fire control directors are still tracking Intrepid. Cool. Tell them to stop and they return to their park positions. Okay. Start steering off. One more gunnery exercise that I want to try before we call it quits here. And also take a look along the side of the ship here. You see that divot that's inside the ship? In the side of the ship, rather? That is the armored belt on the South Dakota. On the Iowas, we have a smooth side because it's all covered by shell plate, but the armored belt, in terms of the torpedo defense, and you'll see that that is extending through basically the entire length of the armored Citadel. That is the torpedo defense armored belt on the South Dakota class. It's an external feature. The Iowas, you can still be inside the ship and access that. South Dakotas, you have to access that from the outside by going over the side of the ship and climbing on the tank top. So that's cool. However, one more exercise that I want to try with our main battery guns at least is firing in the direction of Intrepid, but firing over the top of her so that we don't actually hit her. Alright. Let's do it. Alright, a splash. Right. Well, that worked. Not hit Intrepid. We'll confirm that right now. What's our damage control situation? Nope, no problems. All right, so that works. So we have proven some general aspects of formation navigation, independent navigation, primary, secondary battery guns, a look at damage control, and a look at the map. So that's cool. Don't really know if there's anything else that we could accomplish here for the moment. All I know is that I think we might be ready to try some actual engagements here with this game, which is going to be pretty cool, I think. Going to be cool indeed. And of course, we don't just have American ships in this game. We have got, obviously, surface and submarine. We have got some aerial assets, and we have got Japanese, and I believe British and German assets as well, if not French assets on top of that. So it should be cool. It should be really, really cool. Lots of varieties possible here with this, and I am excited to explore what we have here in War on the Sea. Until next time, though, I do hope that you have enjoyed this one. Ferrari Man 601 saying thank you all very, very much for watching, and of course, we will see you soon.